Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we have the meta snapshot for patch 14.11. This is going to be the week 2 update. We've updated a lot of the images and descriptions of the comps, and we'll be explaining all those changes in this video. So if you want to climb in TFT in the next week, this is going to be the video for you. So starting off in the S tier, we have Duelist, Ashe Warden, Sage Lillia, Ghostly Zyra, Syndra, and Fast 9. Nothing really changed there. The default way to play is probably focusing on the top 3 comps here. They're all 4-cost carries. And depending on what items you kind of get in the early game, depending on what your opponents are going, it's pretty safe to go these 3 comps in like 80-90% of your games. Of course, if you get amazing starts for any of the A tiers, I definitely recommend going for those. That's going to be Kobuko Lucky Paws, Storied Champion Garen, Mythic Lillia, Ethereal Blade Shen, Umbral Alune, Dryad Reroll, Midnight Siphon Yorick, Kayn Lee Sin, Kog'Maw, Duelist, Kai'Sa, Bard, Shen and Senna, Lux, Aphelios, Janna Zyra, Zoe Soraka, Arcanist, Alune Invoker, and Syndra Faded. B tier, probably not going to be playing too much. Maybe like 1% of your games, if that. But you could use these comps to kind of transition into something into the late game, or go for like Fast 9. That's going to be Ghostly 4 costs, Ink Shadow Kai'Sa, Yone Reroll, Story Weaver, Mythic Bard, Kha'Zix Reroll, and Built Different, pretty bad right now, would probably avoid that for now. But let's get on into the comps. If you want the full rundown and all the details on like the how to play section, item holders, augments, things like that, head on over to the website bunnymuffins.lol/meta, where we have the longest running player run meta snapshot. We've been doing it for like 4.5 years now, but let's start off with level 8 and 9 duelists. If you ever find yourself with a mix of frontline and backline attack damage items, this is going to be the comp for you. I also think it's one of the most balanced comps in the meta right now, because you have different carry options for each stage of the game. In the early game, you have Darius and Yasuo as like great units in stage 2. In stage 3, you have Volibear and Tristana to stabilize with if you need to. Sometimes your board is strong enough and you don't really need to roll for them. And then in stage 4, Volibear and Tristana still do the heavy lifting, but if you get like a 1-star Lee Sin, he's going to be great too. And then later on, stage 5 and beyond, 2-star Lee Sin, 1-star Aurelia, 2-star Aurelia are really going to solidify your team. So at each stage of your game, you have some sort of carry unit you could play around with. And that's not true for a bunch of other comps. We're going to go over some of those, but I just want to skip down a little bit to them right now. If we look at, let's say, like the Syndra Dryad comp, I can't really say the same thing about them. For faded units, like, yeah, you have Ahri, yeah, you have Kindred, but they don't hit quite as hard as the Darius, and it's kind of hard to do a linear team change from the early game to the mid game to the late game compared to Duelists. In stage 3, like, yeah, you have Thresh, yeah, you have Kindred, but they don't hit quite as hard or like tank quite as hard or like work together quite as well as Volibear and Tristana. And then obviously at 4 costs, it kind of equals out. You have like Syndra, Ornn, and Annie. They arguably spike harder here, but it's like 3 different units you're looking for at 4 costs. Whereas the other one, you just need Lee Sin. And then for legendaries, Azir and Set, they're good power spikes, but they're nothing compared to getting Aurelia. Aurelia really just like puts Duelists to a whole nother level. So that's what I like about Duelists the most. It's very linear, and at each stage of the game, you have someone who's going to be able to contribute to your team. So it's just very well rounded. It's kind of like Mario in Mario games. Like, he's just good at like all stages or whatever. Not great, not the worst, just like decent everywhere. But since the comp's S tier, it's like good. Just trust me on that. Maybe not the best analogy, but Ashe Warden is going to be the next comp. Like, again, you have snipers from 1 through 4 costs. You have Caitlyn, Senna, Aphelios, and Ashe. Caitlyn not going to completely carry in stage 2. Senna decent in stage 3, but not as good as like the Tristana Volibear in my opinion. Aphelios is pretty solid though, and then obviously equals out at Ashe, but then there's no like 5 costs that really pushes this comp over to the edge. But what's really good about this comp is augments. So if you have a lot of attack speed augments, this is the comp to go for. If you have a lot of attack damage items, this is a comp to go for. If you have no money and want to play a 4 cost comp, this is also a solid comp to go for, because you run quite a few cheap units in Caitlyn, Senna, Aphelios, Amumu, and Alawi. I'd say the most important item in this comp is going to be the Rage Blade on Ashe. After that, some sort of armor penetration through Last Whisper. Even Shroud is useful too. I prefer the Last Whisper, but Even Shroud definitely very usable. If you are able to level up, this is mainly like a level 8 comp. It's like 4 Sniper, 4 Warden. But if you do get level 9, it's very optional. Syndra could be used as like a AP item holder if you have like random AP items that you couldn't really control getting. But overall, decent comp, fairly easy to play, great for beginners. That's kind of like the key to this comp over here. Next one up we have is Sage Lillia, another 4-cost standard leveling comp. I like this one a lot because you have a lot of different options to go for. Also, it's great with Stand United. You run like 50 different traits, as you can see on the left here. And if you have a lot of ability power items, it's probably the best comp to go for right now in terms of 4 costs. Morgana and Lillia are going to be the main item holders, Nautilus main tank, but you do put utility items on him mainly, but really not too much else to say about this comp. If you have ability power items and no one else is going for this, you don't really have a choice, you know? Next one up we have is Ghostly Zyra. This is a good reroll option for people who like 2-cost reroll, or if you get like a great reroll augment in like March of Progress, Golden Ticket, 2 Healthy, things like that. Featherweights I think is another one. But it's focused mainly around Zyra and Shen and Ghostly units. So you run 4 Ghostly, you run Zyra, and then you run as many Sage units as you can. That way you get a lot of ability power onto your Zyra, and everyone in your backline for that matter. And Zyra's able to focus down units, trigger the Ghostly transfer, and then Shen, great tank at 2 costs as per usual. I like double Stoneplate on Shen the most because he benefits a ton from armor. He ends up like 2-shotting a lot of tanks with his auto attacks based on his ability that deals true damage. And then along the way, if you have like Prismatic Ticket, go for Riven 3, Aatrox 3, why not? They're pretty much free, and when you buy those units, it kind of shrinks the unit pool for 2-cost units, so it's easier to hit Shen 3 and Zyra 3, but only go for Riven and Aatrox if you have like a ton of gold. Don't go for them if you're like piss poor or like don't have any Zyras or Shens, because then you can't really afford them. But just roll at level 6 for this comp, follow the 2-cost reroll leveling pattern. If you're not too familiar with that, I'd recommend checking out the leveling guide, either on the website or on YouTube. Just type in Bunny Muffin's leveling guide, and it should show up as the first result. Next comp up we have is Syndra Dryad. It's another option for ability power 4-cost comps, but the Lillia one is going to be a bit better in my opinion. This one's good if you have like a lot of tank items, because you run a lot of units in the front. You have Thresh, you have Ornn, you have Annie, you have Set. Whereas the Lillia comp revolves more around the backline, where you have Morgana and Lillia itemized up. So if you have a lot of tank items and some AP items, then you lean more towards Syndra Dryad. Of course, if you get a bunch of ability power items, you could put them on Azir. Azir's pretty solid. Like, I'm always on and off about Azir. Some fights I absolutely love him. Other fights I'm like, wow, did this 2-star Azir with 3 items even do anything? So I'm sort of love-hate relationship with this guy. But overall, he's going to be pretty solid with the AP items, because who else are you going to put them on? But again, if you have a lot of tank items, Thresh, Ornn, Annie, great units for those. If you have attack damage items, throw them on Set if you are able to get him. Set with attack damage items is probably his best build. What you could do is actually check the data on teamfight.lol, go to champion stats, and then type in Set. Click on him and you'll see that like common items are like BT, Titans, but like the best ones are going to be Edge and Knight, IE, and Sterix apparently. I've even built like Deathblade on him, really good stuff. He just really likes attack damage items. But let's move on into the next comp over here. We have Fast 9 and 5 costs. This one's centered around Dragonlords. You have Janna, you have Rakan, Diana, and Lee Sin. This comp is great because it gives complementary traits to a lot of the legendary units. For example, Lee Sin and Aurelia work well because they're duelists. Azir, Janna, invokers. Rakan is a legendary himself, and then Diana. Diana gives Sage with the Wukong. And I guess there are other good Sage units too, like Morgana, pretty solid as well before you get Wukong. But if you ever have a ton of gold, if you ever have augments like Hedge Fund or Level Up, this is going to be the comp to go for. And 4 Dragonlord is incredibly powerful because it stuns the entire enemy team, and it should give your legendaries enough time to kind of whittle everyone down and eventually kill them. I like having some sort of anti-heal on Aurelia with Red Buff or Morellonomicon, but really, items don't really matter too much for this comp. Just build whatever items you have and get to level 9 and 2-star legendaries as fast as you can. You'll get perfect items later, or not perfect, but like very good items later off the carousel and off the item anvils off the dragons in the late game. But still a very solid comp. If you are high rolling, you just can't play it every single game. Next comps up we have are the A tier. We have Kobuko Lucky Paws, 6 Bruiser, Kobuko, 3 items, tank items. Only go for this if you have the Lucky Paws augment, and only click this if you have like, I'd say at least 3 Kobukos, and then do 1-cost reroll for this comp. Kobuko, very powerful. And then all the other bruisers are pretty solid as well. Silas and Galio are really good at 4 costs, and you can get there really quickly, believe it or not, contrary to other 1-cost rerolls of the past. For example, if you go for Kog'Maw Reroll, where there's no hero augment for Kog'Maw, you generally don't have enough gold to get like good 2-star 4 costs to like really play around every single game. Like, yeah, sometimes you hit it, but not every time. But with Kobuko, since you get 3 extra copies of him when you take the augment, it's really easy to hit him 3-star, and then you accelerate your game, level up, play the 4 cost. And sometimes, you know what, maybe you even get an Aurelia. You get some Story Weavers in that way, oddly enough, because both Riven and Galio are Story Weavers. And then you can also drop in Hui if you really want with Morellonomicon. But if you don't have Hui, put the healing debuff on Aurelia and you're going to be good to go. You could also run Kai'Sa with this. That's what people did in the past, but if you are able to, the legendary version is a bit better because obviously 5 is greater than 4. Unfortunately, my League of Legends teammates do not know that, but hopefully all TFT players know that 5 is greater than 4. So that means legendary units on average are going to be better than 4 cost unit if they're starred the same way. But next up we have is Storied Champion Garen. This one's going to be a 6 Warden build, so it plays very similarly to the Kobuko where you just pick the tank trait, throw 6 of them in, and hope your guy carries. So BT, Titans, Sterix, or another Titans is going to be the ideal build for Garen. I've seen double BT before, but I don't think it's as good as like double Titans, but I'm sure there are worse things you could do in life. For the other Wardens, you could throw tank items on them if you want. Just throw it on whoever's 2-starred. So if you have like 2-star Nautilus, obviously he's going to be the ideal one, but if you don't, if you have 2-star Alawi or 2-star Mumu before you have 2-star Nautilus, like just drop the tank items on them, you're going to be fine. Late game is going to be around Aurelia. With the healing debuff, you have 6 Wardens, so they should live a really long time for Aurelia to slowly burn everyone down. And then Kayle, probably get the armor debuffs. So that's going to be the green Kayle. Pretty solid option because you don't want to run any sort of like Last Whisper on your Garen, but he does like the armor shred because obviously he does a lot of physical damage. Same with Kayle. But just do 1 cost reroll. Played the same exact way as Kobuko. Next one up we have is Lillia Mythic. I like the other Lillia build more, but this one is still very solid. If you have like a +1 Mythic, definitely go for this. Get some sort of mana item on Lillia +2 damage items. And then main tank is mainly going to be Annie. There are a couple of different versions of this. Some people like adding in Warden, some people like adding in the Sylas. Like the Sylas is probably the flex spot. If you get a 2-star 4-cost tank for free, like yeah, play it, but don't grief your game for it. Tahm Kench is obviously flexible too if you want to play a different mythic and you're not running Sylas. But I'd say Annie is probably the core main tank that you want to focus around. You could put like a Protector's Vow on Nautilus to get him to cast faster. And then in the back line, Lillia, Hui going to be your main 2 carries. Azir could be used as supplement support. Pure AP on Lillia plus mana item, and then Hui, Spear Shojin, Morello, and then some random 3rd item. But I generally only play this if I have some sort of mythic augments or emblems from one of the encounters or something like that. If not, I prefer playing the other Lillia build with the Sage. Next build up, we have another hero augment comp, which is Ethereal Blade Shen. Rage Blades in the back, tank items on Yorick in the front. Rage Blades are pretty mandatory. The 3rd item, it's kind of flexible. I see some people put like a healing item on it. I see the 3rd Rage Blade sometimes, and even like the Bramble Vest is pretty good too. But mainly you want at least 2 Rage Blades. The other stuff doesn't matter as much. Morgana in the back line with the anti-heal going to be solid. Also gives you Ghostly. Ghostly is absolutely incredible with Shen because he does fully single target damage. And then if you have room, fit in Umbral. Umbral's nice for the execute also. Yorick 3-star with 3 tank items, 6 Behemoth is going to live a very long time. Enough time for your Shen to hopefully clean everyone up. But obviously when you play this build, if you get 3-star Shen and you only have like a 2-star Yorick with no extra copies, you don't need the Yorick 3-star. You could focus on like Ornn tank at 2-star or even throw in random legendaries. You still play 6 Behemoth, but sometimes you don't 3-star Yorick if you have no copies of him. So only go for Yorick if you have a lot of him before you complete your Shen. But this is just 2-cost reroll. We're going to go over a different build, which is going to be a Yorick-centered build with Midnight Siphon, and those 2 comps play the same way. Next comp up we have is Umbral Alune. Shojin plus Morello going to be the 2 best items on her. That way she casts a lot and also applies a debuff to the most people possible, because she always targets the line with the most characters in it. So if you have like 5 tanks in the front like we have here, she's going to target the front line if she were on the enemy team. If you have like 10 units in the back, then she targets the back line. So that's a good thing about Alune, but you could also use that knowledge to kind of position around it if needed. But for your main tank, it's going to be focused around Sylas and Ornn. Sylas going to use kind of like the Bruiser-ish AP items in the front line. Ionic Spark is very crucial because you do a lot of magic damage in this comp, so getting that to help Sylas himself and to help your Alune going to be very critical. Ornn main tank, he's just a beast all around. People also like putting Ornn on the edge of your tanks, like on the side. That way, people focus him down earlier and he casts his shield, which gives an item to your team. So a lot of people like putting Stoneplate on Ornn and putting him on the side so that you get maybe 1 more item than you normally would. But 6 Umbral is going to be the core here. You get a great execute percentage for the Alune. And then the shield in the front line doesn't hurt either. Next comp up we have is Dryad Reroll. Dryad Reroll is going to revolve around Gnar 3 and Kindred 3. I don't really like this comp too much, but it did get buffed recently. Gnar uses the same items as the Storied champion Garen, which is the BT, Titans, and the Sterix Gauge. Kindred in the back, blue buff plus AP and damage items. And then you just want to run 4 to 6 Dryad. I probably would only play this if I have like a Dryad emblem, because getting to 6 Dryad is really powerful. 4 Dryad and 4 Reaper, while good, I don't think it's quite enough to make this comp like that dominant unless you hit it for free. So that's kind of why the A tier is definitely like a step below the S tier. Midnight Siphon Yorick, we were talking about this before. This is just a hero augment Yorick comp with Midnight Siphon. Getting the regular Midnight Siphon or the plus augment, both good. What's really important is having items for Yorick. So you want tank items. So if you have like a ton of tank items, take the augment, just hard force Yorick. You'll be fine. It plays very similarly to some of the other reroll builds that we saw in the past. Like you have the 6 Behemoth, but you could add in Alune or Azir as like the secondary carries. Azir's good with like the utility items, Alune's good for the damage items, but really it's just 6 Behemoth plus anything else. But it makes sense to go some sort of Umbral unit with Yorick. I'm kind of curious, Midnight Siphon Plus has been the best augment for quite a while. Let's check it again. It still is at the top. That is absolutely crazy. 3.71. You can check like all the historical patches too to see what changed. If we go to like 14.9b, we get a 3.6. Yeah, it's just absolutely bonkers every single patch so far. Next comp up we have is Kog'Maw Reroll. This one is a item check. If you have blue buff and Nashor's Tooth and a lot of Cho'Gaths and Kog'Maws, go for this comp at the start of the game. Or if you have too much candy. If not, I would kind of avoid this because you need a lot going for you to make this comp work. But if you do get that going, very strong. So it's kind of like a go big or go home comp in my opinion. Next one up we have is Sin and Kayn. If you have a lot of melee items, go for this with 4 costs, complement it with Morgana as your support. Again, I've stated this before, but Morgana is probably one of the best support units in the game, both in terms of applying Morello to everyone and also slowing down people's attack speed. Duelist Reroll, if you're going for the level 8 or 9 Duelist build, but you for some reason get a ton of Volibears and Tristanas, you could still go for like regular Duelist Reroll, which was the most popular version of this comp in the past. It's really solid still, but it's only worth it if you get the 3 stars without spending too much. So that's kind of the difference between Duelist Reroll and level 8 and 9 Reroll. Next one up we have is Trickshot Bruiser. Kai'Sa did get buffed a little bit in the last patch, but nothing too crazy there. Just like a very small 4 Trickshot buff. But if you have a lot of attack damage items and everyone's going Ashe and you're like, oh, I wanted to do standard leveling, I have AD items, like what do I do? Like everyone's going Ashe, then you kind of have to go Kai'Sa, so it's a good backup plan. And you could also just fast 9 with it and maybe pivot out of the Kai'Sa later on in the game. Next build up we have is Storyweaver Bard. If you have Rage Blades, that's the only time I would play this. Lots of Tahm Kenches, lots of Bard, lots of Rage Blades. It's kind of like a unit and item check of a comp. Shenna, it's a unit check. If you have a lot of Sennas and you have a lot of Shens, go for this, but a lot of people go for the Ghostly Zyra version instead if you're doing a Shen reroll or a 2-cost reroll. It's still a solid build, just not as good as Zyra. So that's why it's a little bit lower in the tier list right now. Lux Reroll, another 2-cost reroll. Only go for this if you have a ton of +1 Arcanists and Porcelains. If you don't start the game with one of them, or if you don't have Boiling Point at the start of the game, I probably wouldn't even try for this. If we take a look at Boiling Point right now, they did nerf it a bunch. It's 4.8. And if we take a look at Arcanist stuff, we have Crown at 4.42, Crest at 4.78. Porcelain is the other one, 4.6, 4.7. So it is a bit weaker, but if you are able to combine a lot of those different augments together, you could get something to work, but the comp is definitely kind of like a shadow of its former self. Aphelios is going to be the next comp up. I really only play this with +1 Faded, or if you have like amazing augments such as like Final Ascension or any of the Ascensions, pumping up any of them, and also good items for Aphelios, and obviously lots of copies. But unfortunately, there are a lot of Ashe players and they play Aphelios. There are also Syndra Faded players which also take Aphelioses, even though they're not really going for Aphelios as their main carry. So while that's happening, you could sometimes get screwed when you're playing Aphelios Reroll. So that's one annoying thing you kind of have to look for. You can't only look at other players' boards and see like, oh, who's going for Aphelios? You have to say, oh, who's going to buy any sort of Faded unit or Sniper unit? Because those are going to be people who are going to grief you unintentionally. Next one up we have is Janna Zyra Reroll. If you have Enter the Dragon or Too Healthy, go for this. Just Shojin, Rageblade, third item doesn't matter too much on Janna. I've seen like Static Shiv work, I've seen Archangel work, I've seen a bunch of other stuff too. and then throw random tank items on Diana, call it a day. Do a 2-cost reroll for Janna, then 3-cost reroll for Diana afterwards. Next comp up, we have the Zoe, Soraka, Diana reroll. It's the same exact comp, except you run Zoe carry instead of Janna carry. Same augments apply, like 2 healthy is really good, but then you just build a bit differently for your Zoe compared to your Janna. Next comp up we have is Arcanist Warden. You could go like the full Arcanist version too, where you go like 8 Arcanists with like +1 crest or whatever. We did check the data already. It's not like that great or anything or that crazy, but we could also check trait data. If you go to stats and then traits on teamfight.lol, obviously like the 10 traits are the best, right? Like 10 Mythic, 10 Faded, 10 Story Weaver, but you need like a lot of +1s to get that to work. Let's look at Arcanists. So we have 8 Arcanists at 4.01, 2 Arcanists 4.27, 4, 4.6, 6, 4.89. So there definitely is a big difference between 6 and 8 Arcanists. So again, when you are playing these Arcanist comps, I do really recommend getting an Arcanist emblem in some way, shape, or form. However you do it, it could be from like Wandering Sentinels, it could be from Arcanist Crest or whatever, but like just make sure you have it because the comp gets a lot stronger. If you don't have it and you're playing this comp, I do recommend transitioning into some sort of like level 9 comp instead. So you play this in stage 4, maybe even stage 5, and then late in stage 5 or early stage 6, you switch into a legendary board and then transfer the items over onto other people. That's kind of how I use some of the lower A tier comps and B tier comps in like pretty much every patch of TFT and every set in existence. That's kind of what they're there for because most games are going for the S tiers. Next one up we have is Alune Invoker Reroll. I like the Umbral version better, but if you don't get any of the Umbral units, you kind of have to go for this. Also, if you get an Annie 2 for free while you're going for Alune and you have a bunch of items on her and you have Lillia and a bunch of AP items, like yeah, sure, go for this version instead of the other one. Otherwise, it's just like a 3-cost reroll, but the other version's a bit better. Syndra Faded, again, same thing. Better versions of Syndra exist, but it's still playable if you get +1 Faded or even +2 Faded. Definitely something to be worth exploring. Or if you get like a lot of the Faded items 2-star for free, that's when you would kind of go for this. Next one up we have is a B tier, 4-cost Ghostly, Ink Shadow Kaisa, Heavenly Yone, Story Weaver Reroll, Mystic Bard. Like all these comps have better versions, or they're just not very good right now, or they're like highly situational. And since we just pretty much went over like maybe 20 comps, there's kind of better things to go for. Like I wouldn't pay attention to these too much. It's kind of like going to New York City if you're visiting and you're like, oh, should I check out Soho? It's like, yeah, sure, if you really want to. Like it's probably worth the visit, as in it's probably worth playing these comps every now and then, but if you go to the Empire State Building, if you go to Ellis Island or whatever, World Trade Center, things like that, I don't even know where tourists go in New York anymore, but like that's gonna be the S tiers and the A tiers, you know? It's like the B tiers, it's like, oh, this like neighborhood in New York, if you really want to go there, like yeah, sure, do it, but during your trip you probably don't have time to visit everything. So that's kind of how I treat the like B tiers, and then the C tier is kind of like the place you don't want to visit. So yeah, like probably don't want to be playing Build Different, you know, even if people in New York consider themselves built different. Let's take a look. What's it averaging? 4.91. You know, it improved a little bit. I think it was like 5.0 before, 5.53, so it did improve since like the last patch when they buffed it. But hopefully this video has helped you know what to play in this current patch and how to play them. I think how to play is more important than what to play in a lot of cases, because everything works. Whenever you watch like people play who are really good at TFT, they play all sorts of stuff. Well, it depends on the player, but some of them play all sorts of stuff, and you kind of learn why they go for them in certain situations, and it's not always just one-dimensional, like only go Duelist every single game or something like that. Like, yeah, it could work in a lot of cases. I know a lot of players, they're pretty high rank, and they only go for like 1 or 2 comps, but most players, they kind of like flex between like a bunch of them. It's just a matter of knowing when to go for which, but find whatever playstyle works for you, kind of stick to that. That's my recommendation as per usual, but that's going to be it from me for this week. We're going to have a new patch on Wednesday, so we're going to come out with a patch preview on Tuesday when they release the notes, so I hope to see you all there. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video. I'll see you all next time.